everybody, and welcome to episode 48 of Own the Road with AutoTrader, where we make car stuff simple for Canadians. My name is Jodi, and I'm the editor-in-chief of AutoTrader.
And my name is Dan Alika, and I am AutoTrader's road test editor.
So this podcast topic came up recently, and I know by the time this airs, we're going to be in like mid-February.
Yes.
But that still means we've got like at least 2 months of solid winter ahead of us still.
That's true.
And remember one time there was a huge snowstorm in like April?
Yeah.
Depressing.
And that's just here, like, keep in mind, we tend to, I don't want to feed the whole, like, oh, Toronto, center of the universe. But, like, it is easy. You just think about your local area. But, like, back in the day when I lived in Alberta, I remember, I think I've told this story before. I worked at a newspaper out there, and I asked about the weather, and they're like, oh, yeah, if we make it through May 2-4, like without snow, that's kind of the end of it. And I was like, okay, like not terrible. And then we made it through May 2-4, no snow. And I was like, sweet, like summertime, here we come. And then it was a Friday and it was June 1st and it snowed and it stayed for the weekend. And I was like, what is
June 1st?
So yeah, we've had bad storms in April and been like, wow, but like there are parts of Canada that are still very snowy, deep into the spring. So these tips apply. Doesn't matter where you live. Stuff like the winter tire tip. That's just like, now I do want to say winter tire adoption rate has been steadily increasing, kind of self-reported. I want to say I read recently that Canada-wide, it's about 59%. I would much rather see it at 100%. Even if you live in lower mainland BC.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not about snow. The biggest misnomer, people call them snow tires. That's such an antiquated term. They are not snow tires. They are winter tires. It's about snow, but it's about ice. And more importantly, it's about the ambient temperature. Rubber gets hard like a hockey puck when the temperature drops, but the rubber compound on a winter tire is more pliable. It's more resistant to cold weather. So if you go and touch the tread blocks on an all-season tire when it's cold out, it's literally like pressing on a hockey puck. Like you cannot, there's no pliability whatsoever. If you walk over and do the same on a winter tire, the rubber moves, it's nice and soft and cushy, and that's the point. So they are winter tires, not snow tires. You need them anywhere that you live in Canada. It's silly not to have them.
Yeah.
This is last episode I ranted about the government and the Transport Canada lighting mandate.
Oh, here's another Dan rant.
The Dan rant. The Canadian government needs to mandate winter tires. This is crazy. This to me is a non-negotiable. Quebec is the only province that has done this, and it's genius, and it's been the case for years, and people were upset, and then guess what? They all got on with their lives, and they bought winter tires because they had to. And that's the end of the story.
Yeah, just for safety. And another thing that I always want to tell people about winter tires is that even if you have all-wheel drive, you still need winter tires. I hear all the time that like, oh, I never bought winter tires because I have all-wheel drive. Yeah. Like, that is so wrong.
And why?
Because all-wheel drive does nothing to help you stop faster.
Jodi, there's a clever way to say it. It's all-wheel drive, not all-wheel stop.
There you go.
Okay?
Okay.
That's the thing. It's like, yeah, you can, sure, extra traction is great. I am fully on board. I used to have a Subaru Outback that had full-time all-wheel drive, loved it, appreciated the benefits of it, but that didn't mean I could slow down any sooner if I hit black ice or whatever. So be smart, get winter tires, and let's get on with the episode.
Yeah, so I really wanted to do this episode about winter driving advice that, you don't learn this stuff in driving school, right? You learn by experience, or you learn by researching it on your own. Mm-hmm. And so I always remember, like, a couple years ago, we had huge snow, like a foot, maybe more of snow. And we saw this guy in a pickup truck just stranded in this parking lot that had not been cleared yet.
Yeah.
So we were like, hey, do you need any help? And he's like, he was from Jamaica, he said. And he's like, this is my first time seeing snow. I'm like, why did you drive into this lot? He's like, I didn't know. He just didn't know.
Yeah,
and so fair. I feel like there's so many people in this situation where they just don't know because nobody ever told them. And this is their first winter.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk about these classic, winter driving wisdoms that you could use, but are also really useful for people who have experienced winter before too. And this guy, he had a rear-wheel drive truck with an empty bed, and so he was doomed from the get-go, right?
Yeah, that's...
So just starting with this guy.
Wait, before you go on, because you said right from the get-go, and I told that story about when I lived in Alberta, I want to tell the rest of you. Jodi knows this story. I don't know if I'll name him. Maybe it'll just be a former coworker. Great guy, incredible photographer, wasn't necessarily like, he didn't come in as a good journalist, and the guy that hired us, his name was Fred Rinney. He was our editor. He died a few years ago, but anyways, he hired Aaron because I named him anyways. So he hired him because he was like, listen, you can't teach an eye for photography, but you can teach somebody how to string some words together. So as a reporter, it made a lot of sense, because newspapers have been in decline for years, and having staff photographers just isn't realistic. But when Aaron would transcribe interviews, he would just hear terms and turns of phrase that he'd never heard before. And instead of ask, Google, whatever, he'd just write what he heard. And so there was one that he was transcribing this quote from somebody, and in his mind, he heard right from the gecko, like direct from the lizard's mouth,
an honest
I guess.
mistake.
So he wrote that. So anyways, it just reminded me that you...
I love that. There's a whole Reddit about that called Bone Apple Tea instead of Bon Appetit.
Yeah. But that's the thing. I've only ever read these.
Yeah.
But Aaron was good for every once in a while, he'd have a genuine one that I'd hear or read, like that he had just written, and it was always just cracked us up.
That's so charming. I love that
anyways,
kind of stuff.
back to the get-go of your story.
Yeah, so this guy who was stuck in an unplowed parking lot in his empty rear-wheel drive truck.
Yes.
What is your top tip for getting him out?
I mean, first,
don't drive into unplowed areas.
Yeah. But so first of all, like we just talked about, winter tires are an absolute, when it comes to a rear-wheel drive truck like that, put some weight in the bed. It doesn't matter what it is, but you're going to want, a good couple 100 pounds over the rear axle, because an empty truck like that means, aside from the shell of the bed itself, there's no pressure that's, providing traction. There's no weight pushing down on the wheels. So that is another one. The other thing I will caution, and it doesn't matter whether it's front, rear, all four-wheel drive, all of them, be judicious with your throttle input.
Yeah, so
that's a huge one.
Your mind will tell you just to slam the throttle to try to get out. More
skinny pedal, if you will.
Yeah.
Bad idea.
But it's actually really counterproductive.
Yeah, it can. It digs ruts. I've seen it happen both in snow and in mud going four-wheeling, where you just you get buried up to your up to your rocker panels, or bury the axle, and you're not going anywhere after that. Whereas even if you get stuck in a situation where you've been gentle with the throttle, whether it's somebody pulling you out or pushing, you're able to do it fairly easily. But once you get buried, you're going to need some serious help getting that vehicle unstuck.
It took us 3 people to help get him unstuck. Yeah. We had, I think I was driving. We had another guy, and we were rocking it back and forth. Yeah. And we had like the 2 guys pushing. It took us a while to get him out there, but he was really grateful, and he learned his lesson.
Yeah, but just do your best. Again, even if you have all-wheel drive and winter tires, an unplowed parking lot it's a risky place to go, especially because you don't necessarily know how deep the snow is. So you might say, well, I've got all-wheel drive and I've got winter tires, but if the snow is too deep, that stuff isn't necessarily going to help you. So that's a place that I try not to venture.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, the other thing to consider is and I had this when I went down to Buffalo to go to that Bills playoff game. Buffalo had got hammered with snow. The game was pushed back a day because of it, and there was just a ton of snow. And so, you get those situations where the mouths of driveways, intersections, they get all that snow and slush that builds up, falling off of vehicles and whatnot. That's a scenario where you're going to need more throttle. to kind of power through it. But again, just be thoughtful in how you're applying that extra throttle. Make sure that you're applying so much that you're going to careen out of control and hit somebody or go off the road or whatever. But what I mean is, if you're approaching, you see this snow, there's no way around it. You have to go through it, and you're cruising at city speeds, let's say 50 kilometers an hour. Just a little bit more momentum is what is going to take to get through. But don't just like hammer down and go. Just be very measured and thoughtful in how you're applying that throttle.
Yeah, for winter driving, but all driving, smooth inputs is safe inputs.
Yes.
That's what I always tell people.
Yeah.
You don't want to do anything too jerky, because that's when things go sideways.
And literally, so that's another point, is keep the wheels straight, keep them pointed in a straight line, because let's say you apply a little bit of steering, but what's going to happen is your tires are going to, do what's called plowing. They're going to push their way across. You might kind of forget that you've turned them. And then once you hit dry pavement or whatever, once you find traction, the vehicle is going to kind of dart in whatever direction the wheels are pointed. So just, try at all times to make sure that the vehicle is pointed in a straight line. That's when you're going to apply the throttle. You're going to push through. If you feel it start to get bogged down, new driver, novice or veteran, it doesn't matter. You'll be able to tell if the amount of throttle you've applied is enough. If it's really starting to slow you down, and you're in it, there's no choice. That's the point where you apply a little bit more. And same thing, if you just feel yourself slowing down, more, but don't overdo it. And if you come to a dead stop, no more throttle. Back off. And, if you're in a live lane of traffic, hazards on, and kind of assess the situation and go from there. But don't just keep, hammering the throttle and expect the results to change. That's not how this works.
Yeah, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
The other tip that I learned from both of my parents, and they were like really strict on enforcing this, is that you have to keep your tank as full as possible.
Yeah.
I don't let my tank go past half.
Yeah,
but my mom
good.
is like 75%. She
Yeah.
won't go past 75%.
That's fair. The dilemma for me is because, Jodi and I don't drive our personal vehicles very often, because we're always testing new vehicles so that we can, tell you guys all about them. And because of that, fuel, like, yes, it's better now than it once was, but it does age. It does start to break down. I drive a diesel. Well, both of us drive diesels. And which means that, we don't have to fill up as frequently. I can get, 1,000 kilometers out of a tank. So that becomes my dilemma, where a tank of fuel will last me months.
Right.
So keeping it topped up, that's what I like to do. But then I'm like, I've got all this old fuel sitting in my tank.
In your particular situation, it wouldn't work.
But I'm just saying, like, that's why. So I kind of, let's say I bend my own rules a little bit. But yes, Jodi and I are both of the mind that, like, minimum 50% full. Now, of course, if you're on a road trip or whatever, it's just that idea that keep it as full as possible, because you never know if you get in a situation where, you break down. The other thing to keep in mind, especially with something like a truck, that's extra weight in the back.
That's true.
So
yeah.
having a full fuel tank, that's, a couple 100 pounds of with one of those huge, if you've got like 120 liter tank, that's a lot of weight to have in the back. So,
and that's going to help you get extra traction in case you do get stuck.
But Jodi, why don't you tell them one of the big reasons why you should keep the tank as full as possible?
Well, for me, it's just in case you get stranded, right? And so one of our contributors, Justin Pritchard, he's from Northern Ontario, right? So he has a lot of experience with winter driving.
Some might say he travels thousands of kilometers through Northern Ontario conditions.
Every year. Yeah. So
he really likes to push that.
He's seen it a lot. Yeah. And so he wrote this really great story about explaining how you can calculate how long you can stay warm on a tank of gas. So if you are stranded and, help is on the way, but you don't know how long it's going to take, and you need to keep warm because otherwise, you're going to get frostbite, or something worse could happen.
Or you're going to just be uncomfortable.
Yeah, that too. Who wants that?
Yeah.
And so there's a couple numbers you need to know here. Yeah. And I'm not good at math, but even I can do this math. So if I can do it, anyone can do it. So Natural Resources Canada says that the average engine burns 0.6 liters of fuel per hour per displacement. Per liter of displacement at idle.
Yeah, keep it simple. If you drive a vehicle with a 2-liter engine, that means you're likely to burn about 1.2 liters of fuel, whether it's gas or diesel, for every hour that it's idling. So in a situation like that. Oh, another piece of advice before we get too deep into this.
Okay.
Let's say you skid off the road, you end up in a ditch, and you're waiting for help. You've got your mostly full tank of fuel, and you're gonna sit there with the vehicle running to stay warm. Before, if it's safe to get out of the vehicle, let's say you're kind of 4 wheels down, make sure to clear the snow away from the tailpipe, because you do not want those emissions kind of circulating around or up into the vehicle. Keep in mind, yes, it's a sealed vehicle, but everyone has done it. You drive, you smell, outside smells, you smell gas after going to the gas station. So if you're sitting there for hours with that, noxious gas, you can get carbon.
Absolutely. And it will just creep up on you.
And literally die.
So definitely clear the snow.
This isn't even snow related. There was a story last year. I want to say it was Virginia, and 3 or 4 U.S. Army soldiers or Marines or something like that were found dead in a car at a gas station 30 miles from the base or something like that they were stationed at. And at first it was well, what happened? Is it foul play? Was it drug overdose? Nobody. And it turned out that the car they were in had a huge exhaust leak that went unrepaired, and they all died from carbon monoxide poisoning from driving. So keep it. That's while in motion.
Right.
All that exhaust was
so it
feeding
happens
into
way
the vehicle
faster than you think.
Exactly. So if you're stationary for that long, clear the snow again. If it's safe to do so, get out of the vehicle and just make sure to dig, let's say 2 feet around where the exhaust, comes out, wherever your tailpipe is, to make sure that there's a kind of clear path for that exhaust to dispel.
That is very, very important advice.
Yeah.
So just getting back to this math.
Yeah.
0.6 liters of fuel burning per liter of displacement at idle. You need to know the 0.6 liter figure.
Yes.
You also need to know the displacement of your engine, which you can find, you can Google it, or it's in your owner's manual.
Yeah.
Then you also need to know how big your fuel tank is, which is also, you can Google it, or it's in your user manual.
Yeah.
So how you do this math is you times 0.6 by the number of liters that your engine displaces. And that gives you how many liters of gas your engine uses per hour while it's idling.
Yeah.
And then you take that number and you multiply it by the capacity of your fuel tank. And the result is how many hours you'll get at idle on a full tank. If you have half a tank, you divide that number in half, et cetera, et cetera.
So again, just using that simple math. It's a 2-liter engine. You've got half a tank, and it's a 50-liter tank. So you've got 25 liters of fuel, and you know that it's going to burn through about 1.2 liters of fuel per hour. So give or take, you've got about, 22 hours that you could safely, idle before running out of fuel. Now, a couple more pointers in this. Yes, A, it's terrible for the environment. B, if you've got yourself in this situation, obviously we want to make sure that you're safe, and we don't wish that on anyone. But keep in mind that, in that scenario, if you let the vehicle, it's going to take more fuel to warm the vehicle back up.
Mm-hmm.
So again, just be very smart and strategic in your approach, because, so basically, let's say you go off the road, go into the ditch, you realize you're stuck, you're not getting out of there for a while. Let's hope that you can get help, a tow truck, whatever, within, an hour or so. But if it's going to be a little while, keep the doors closed, windows closed. Obviously, it's cold outside, but just be strategic, because if you let the engine cool down entirely, it's going to take more fuel at idle to warm it back up to temperature, which means you will have less, time on the clock, so to speak, before you run out of fuel. So just be smart. But yeah, that's the basics of it.
And then I wanted to address what happens in an EV. Like, how long can an EV go in that same situation?
Hours.
Way longer than that, right?
You could, idle an EV for literally, like, okay, to give you guys a little bit of context, because obviously neither of us have ever done this, but when we shoot our video reviews, if it's a gas-powered vehicle, when we're doing all those beauty shots and whatever, it's like, turn it off and it's just in accessory mode, because there's no need to just be spewing emissions for no apparent reason. With an EV, you can leave it, and if it's hours of shooting in a parking lot or whatever, you might lose 6% battery capacity. And that's like, I'm being very, worst case scenario. I talked to a FedEx driver when we went out for lunch with the rest of the marketing team just before the holidays.
Oh yeah, and it was an electric delivery truck. He was
driving a Bright Drop, which is a GM made. It's made in Canada, right here in Ontario. They're really cool. And I said to him, well, how long, like, what's your range? And he was like, well, like, it's hard to say. Keep in mind, delivery drivers, their routes are, unless you're talking about rural, but in the city, it's a pretty tiny route in terms of kilometers. But he was like, well, in terms of like time, he's like, I only have to charge this thing once every 2 weeks or so.
That's amazing.
And keep in mind, like, yes, okay, he's got, the benefit of regenerative braking, so that's going to offset some of the energy loss by recovering kinetic energy and putting it into the battery. But like, if he can drive that thing daily, 5 days a week for 2 weeks,
in the
wintertime, that gives you an idea of how long you can idle, so to speak, in an EV. But there's no environmental impact of doing it. So if I were to get stranded in a snowbank in a vehicle, I would absolutely hope it's an EV. The counterpoint to that is they do, internal combustion vehicles lean on their mechanical components, their engines, to generate heat. That's where the heat is coming from. Obviously, an electric motor generates very little heat. So you'll notice EVs, even though they warm up kind of instantly because there is no warm up time, they use heat pumps, and some of them, like, remember Hyundai had that like little accessory heater in the Kona EV for the passenger side footwell because it was like freezing cold on that. Yeah, it was terrible.
Oh, I didn't even know they had that.
God, it was hilarious. But anyways, the point being that it's not quite the same. And yes, there is going to be some significant range loss if you've got the temperature set to 30 degrees and the fan at full speed, of course, because there's no kind of residual heat being generated by an engine. But yeah, you could be in an EV for hours, not feel guilty about the environmental impact, and just have it running and listen to the radio, have your heated seat on, whatever.
Yeah, I was going to say the heated seats and heated steering wheel basically take no power to run. So that's a really great option.
But you know what bothers me? Often, in whether it's EVs or internal combustion vehicles, there is no, more often than not, I find you cannot use the heated seats and heated steering wheel without it being on. Like, they won't work in accessory mode.
Oh.
So that's one of those things where you're still going to have to turn the vehicle on. But again, it's like not the end of the world, right, especially in an EV, because it's, there's no emissions. So.
Okay, there's two more things that I wanted to go over. One of them is tire pressure. So we all know we're supposed to check our tire pressure all the time. I don't think a lot of people do it, but please tell us why it's extra important in the winter.
I'm also not here to play holier than thou. I don't do it as frequently as I should, especially in the winter because it's cold and miserable. But I do have a tire pressure. First of all, I do not rely on the tire pressure gauges that are built into the air pumps that you would use at a gas station or whatever. They usually do work, but they're broken. They're just not accurate, whatever. So have one with you. The reason why is just rolling resistance, right? It doesn't matter whether it's winter or summer. You know, a deflated tire takes more energy to turn. Therefore, you're going to burn more gas, whatever. In the wintertime, it becomes more problematic because air is thinner. Those molecules tend to escape from a tire because it's just cold outside. That's how science works. And that's also why nitrogen fill is a good option. Basically, the molecules are larger, so they're not as prone to escaping the way that, just putting air in a tire would happen with time. But yeah, that's the big reason why is the rolling resistance is poor with a deflated tire, and they tend to deflate more in cold.
Cool. And the last thing, and this one can be kind of controversial, but is rust proofing worth it?
No. I mean, listen, maybe, 40 years ago, I would have said, yeah, I mean, I wasn't alive, but if this were, let's say like the 80s, I'd be like, yeah, it's probably a good call. Nowadays, no, I just don't. All new vehicles go through a corrosion prevention process. It's like a bath that the body, before it gets painted, gets dipped in. The problem is not all these rust proofing processes, they're different. So I'm not painting them all with the same brush, but the ones especially that you want to avoid are the ones that they, drill holes in the body. The reason why is I'm not saying that all, car companies are evil and they're looking for ways to screw you. But if the structure has been compromised and you bring it in for a warranty related issue, or that, it does start to rust and you go, well, this shouldn't be happening, and I've got this corrosion warranty on the vehicle, and you bring it in and they find that that somebody has drilled in to rust proof, that could void that warranty. So then you end up getting doubly screwed by your own doing. So I wouldn't do it. Those stupid little devices that you can buy that supposedly send these pulses of electrons through, they do not work.
Snake oil.
Exactly. So no, rust proofing. Yes, we have, we rely on too much salt in our diets and on our roads. That's just like a weird addiction that we have in Canada.
Love salt.
Not all of Canada. Lots of places use sand still. Remember, people would always post cars on AutoTrader and it was like Alberta car. That's because Alberta typically, is a sanding province as opposed to Ontario, which is all about the salt.
Yeah, we use a lot of brine now too.
Now brine and it's beet juice.
Beet juice?
For whatever, I don't know if you guys know this, but oftentimes when you see those trucks that are spraying liquid like de-icing and they have big signs, probably because some conspiracy theorist was,
Well, wouldn't it just look like a crime scene?
No, it's not, because it's so light. It's a mist, right? But no, they're not. What is it? Bottles of beet juice? They just
I was just picturing streams of red on the roads. But
that's what the spray is, because it doesn't. It's not as affected by, for whatever reason, it isn't affected by deep cold. So there's a certain temperature. I can't remember what it is offhand, but there's a certain temperature where salt becomes less effective, and that's when this de-icing fluid, and oftentimes it's a beet juice spray.
Delicious.
Yeah.
I mean, I like beets.
I wouldn't drink.
I wouldn't lick it off the road though.
No. Well, you're a little weird.
It's true. Before our Ask an Expert segment, here's a message from your friends at AutoTrader.
Struggling to find the car you want? AutoTrader always has hundreds of thousands of cars for sale all across Canada, making it a great way to find a great car at a great price. Visit AutoTrader today.
So today's Ask an Expert comes to us from C.A. Badley. And it's in regards to the Canadian government's mandates for 100% of new passenger car sales to be EV by 2035.
Yes.
So they ask, in 2035, will hybrids still be sold in addition to EVs? Great question.
This is a very good question. The answer is no, not conventional hybrids. However, as of right now, plug-in hybrids are still part of this ZEV mandate, which stands for Zero Emission Vehicle. But again, as of today, the minimum range, all-electric range, would be 80 kilometers. So plug-in hybrids that can travel at least 80 kilometers will still be sold new in Canada as of 2035, alongside battery electric vehicles and hopefully more hydrogen vehicles. But conventional hybrids will not be sold.
Yeah, so I think PHEVs
Yes.
are going to be really major, especially I think for a lot of...
I disagree.
Really? You think so? I was thinking from like a enthusiast standpoint, performance car standpoint. I feel like I don't want to say it's a loophole, but it's a little bit of a loophole,
totally a loophole
for automakers to continue to sell vehicles without fully committing to EVs.
Just to be like, I would like to see that be the case. But I think there's a reason why some brands have just skipped. Like, look at Genesis.
Yeah, they went right to EVs.
Right to EVs. And lots of brands, if you talk to them, they're PHEVs. What do you like to call PHEVs?
Yeah.
They are not part of the plan. I think that is like a Band-Aid solution. And I agree. Like, in theory, it would be a great idea. And I could be wrong. And hopefully, episode whatever, 1200 of Own the Road with AutoTrader, will be sitting here talking about it and being like, wow, Jodi was right. Or more likely, no, I'm kidding. But anyways, or that I was right and that plug-in hybrids do not become as, or do not kind of gain in popularity the way that they probably should or could. I think like electrification is the direction, and plug-in hybrids are going to fade just like the rest of the gas-powered vehicles.
I would hate to see is, someone like, I don't want to name names, but let's say Dodge, for example, because they are very late to the EV and the
Welcome to the brotherhood.
Exactly, the brotherhood of muscle. So I feel like this would be a great way for them to continue offering big honkin' V8s that are gas guzzlers, but you put a battery in there, it's all good to go.
Yeah.
And whether or not people are actually going to plug it in, that's, to be debated, because a lot of people apparently don't plug in hybrids, but buy them to get the benefits that those drivers get.
And they qualify for
incentives. Rebates, you can use the high occupancy lanes. You get, you can park in.
The other thing I'll say though, that I don't know how this is going to play out. I would imagine it'll, the government will say no, but Ram has that Ram charger, which is like basically, Ram's making it seem like it's this. If you guys don't know about this, it's basically the Chevy Volt of pickup trucks. So the first gen Volt, when it came out, it was really novel, but it was this idea that it was battery, it was an electric vehicle, but it had this range extender. It had a gas engine, and that would just charge it on the go. BMW did it with the i3. You could get it with this little range extender. Other brands have done this. Ram's like, oh yeah, it's got infinite mileage.
I hate that language that they use, the infinite range.
Yeah,
it's just very misleading to me because it's not infinite.
Yeah.
It's only infinite as long as your gas tank is full.
So the loophole there is like, well, it's not powering the wheels. It's a generator, and it's just putting, energy into the battery. I think the government's going to say that that's got to go too. But anyways, that's kind of where we're at.
Thank you for your question, C.A. Badley. If any of you have questions you would like to ask Dan or I, please email us at expert@trader.ca. That wraps up this episode. So thank you so much for joining us. Drive safe, and we'll see you next time.
Bye, guys.